She is among the few women who have dared to examine the most intimate facets of celebrity, even when those facets reveal her own concealed suffering. She was extremely gorgeous, talented, and had a strong, independent spirit that never gave up, which is why many people look up to her. Her figure was made of steel, her eyes were like fire, and her presence on television was like a hurricane. She moved a nation's soul during the war in Coming Home, and she horrified the world in Clute. Later, her well-known exercise recordings transformed many families' everyday routines. Beyond the bright lights and behind the camera, however, was a woman who was silently bearing injuries that words could never cure. And amid all the accolades and scathing criticism, what truths has Jane Fonda been concealing for so long? When was Jane Fonda introduced to you? Was it a sentence, a scene, or perhaps just the way she gazed at you that did it? Join us now as we remove the glamour and glitz to unveil the final door leading to a Jane Fonda that has never been seen in the world. Jane Fonda was just a lonely girl living in a house that was gorgeous on the exterior but didn't nourish her spirit before anyone knew her name. She was born and raised in the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, where millions of people looked up to her well-known father, Henry Fonda. However, to Jane, he was an incomprehensible and distant figure. Her mother, Frances, was a kind door that closed too soon and too softly. Her father never gave her a hug, a compliment, or let her go. If there was affection, it was cloaked in unrelenting silence and severe judgment. Despite being too young to comprehend the significance of popularity, Jane was taught a hard reality at a young age. If she wasn't ideal, if she wasn't quiet enough, slender enough, or submissive enough, he might not even see her. But the wound that would tear her life apart was not something she was prepared for. When Jane was just 12 years old, her mother, Frances, passed away in a mental health facility. She was diagnosed with heart failure by her parents. Nobody offered an explanation. Nobody let out a cry. There was no place to feel depressed. Her mother's photos were gone from the walls. Her name was never spoken again. She seemed to have never been there. A few weeks later, in a cruel and memorable event, Jane learned the truth. She was reading a magazine alone at school when a chilly, clinical line struck her like a dagger. Not in the embrace of family members or from her father's lips, her mother had committed suicide. Rather, she used the icy ink of an unfamiliar page. Not just Jane was broken by that incident. What remained of her youth was taken away by it. The previous evening, she hadn't gone downstairs to bid them good night. That wasted moment became a life sentence for the child whose heart was devastated by the loss of a loved one. Her sense of irrational guilt persisted. It clung like a thorn to her chest. For years, she secretly believed that if she had simply said goodbye, her mother may still be alive. Her father offered her no consolation or support. He continued as if nothing had occurred. Jane also followed suit. On the interior, however, the crack widened. She stopped asking and hoping. She made herself flawless, untouchable, and frigid. The regulations weren't broken by her. She performed. She wasn't depressed. She continued. She didn't yell. She vanished behind walls of rigid regulations. Her beauty, skill, and fire were later lauded by the world, but they failed to notice the silent cry that underpinned it all. The child's agonizing, desperate longing to feel loved. It wasn't by accident that Jane Fonda ended up where she is. In order to survive, she got up. Because she learned from the harsh silence of her early years, and no one mentioned it, that, like her mother, she could be forgotten if she didn't find her calling. A teenage Jane Fonda was gradually collapsing under the expectations of beauty in 1960s Hollywood, where it was regarded as the law. She was in her 20s, everyone admired her, and glossy magazine covers featured her face. On the inside, however, she was a cathedral of silence, guilt, and invisible scars. She resembled Diana from the sad fairy tale of Hollywood. She was not your typical superstar. The most important things were that no one saw her, heard her, or touched her, even though she was wearing velvet and had flashbulbs shining on her. Despite growing up surrounded by legends and born into a family of Hollywood stars, she never received much affection. Her father, Henry Fonda, was icy frigid in real life. He didn't show her any affection or admiration, and he saw her defects rather than her beauty. If she wasn't small enough, silent enough, or flawless enough, she feared he wouldn't notice her ever again. Notoriety altered that opinion. It became more difficult. Jane detested herself, but those who saw her adored her. Behind every grin on the red carpet, she was engaged in a futile struggle. She concealed her battle with bulimia behind the headlines and fashion. She'd purge and binge. Nobody was aware. Jane looked so flawless that she was unable to even look at herself in the mirror. He heard her say later, "I hated my body. If I could just mend things, maybe I wouldn't feel so broken." Hollywood took some time to recover. It exacerbated the injury. Wealthy and idealistic studio executives frequently offered poor counsel in the guise of goodwill. To make her face appear smaller, one individual even suggested that she should have her back teeth out and break her jaw. It wasn't a joke. In Hollywood, it made sense. Jane listened because she still wanted to be loved. She was desperate, not proud, which is why she had facial surgery. Every action was an appeal for deservingness and an effort to dispel skepticism. The mirror, however, was never content. No matter how flawless she appeared, the inner girl was still wounded. Although many individuals romanticize their 20s, they were incredibly difficult years due to loneliness, embarrassment, and the need to always pretend that everything was okay. Her demeanor exuded elegance, composure, and courage. She admitted to herself that she never imagined turning 30. The pain was so severe. A star rose across the world. The fall that was occurring just out of frame was missed by them. Behind the well-preserved exterior was a lady fighting for her life. Her yearning for love destroyed her, and a world that only cared about the outside left her feeling empty. The wounds from that period never quite healed, despite the emergence of fresh concepts and powerful backing in subsequent years. She was no longer the child of Henry Fonda. Jane had the might of a fire-forged force. Her soul was strong enough to resist the system that had attempted to turn her into a submissive doll, and she had an iron will and a razor-sharp mind. Don't they shoot horses in the process? She made a tremendous impression because of the anguish it caused her, not because she was attractive. 1969, in which she portrayed a life-weary dancer. It wasn't a performance. It was the cry of a soul on the verge of shattering. Every glance was razor-sharp. Sadness shook every movement. It was seen by all at the time. She acted to dispel people's illusions rather than to make them happy anymore. Clute, 1971, the following film, might have been a cliché. However, Jane transformed the call girl into a survivor, a woman whose soul endured despite her shattered body. Her success was unaffected by that first Oscar. It was a declaration of fresh beginnings. She also delivered a raw sensitivity that left viewers gasping in Coming Home, 1978. As a woman caring for a disabled soldier, each tear was genuine, lived, and not staged. Her second Oscar served as a test as much as a reward. Jane had begun to choose parts based on their personal significance rather than their popularity. She got tired of creating meaningless stories to get money, so she co-founded her own production firm. This was an audacious and perhaps risky act for a woman in her era. However, it allowed her to regain the freedom that had always been denied to her. She started telling him tales about feminism, justice, and war, not to soothe him, but to get him to think. Coming Home moved people more than just hearts. It forced America to confront the issues it had been evading. In movies, Jane didn't hide. Over there, truth was being contested. Even though it lost her employment, money, and Hollywood fame, she remained loyal to her convictions to the very end. Jane chose to tell the truth in a world full of lies. She did more than merely perform on film sets, at anti-war demonstrations, at the Oscars, and in congressional sessions. She utilized art as a tool, pushed people, and raised questions. There was no resume for her employment history. The letter was open. She was a wonderful person to remember because of her fear, not her fame. Attention was never Jane Fonda's goal. To make it visible to others, she transformed it into a torch. Jane Fonda experienced an incident that would define her after a period of tragedy and fame. It did not take place on a film set, but in a distant nation. She had lost her former beauty as an actress by the early 1970s. Her own issues and other people's expectations made her feel heavy. This inspired her to ponder deeper issues of kindness and significance. She began to hear the stories of war-affected children, families, and veterans because she wanted to understand. She then traveled overseas in 1972 to personally witness the impacts of war. She visited schools, hospitals, and heavily affected towns. She was profoundly affected by what she witnessed: grace in the face of grief and strength in the face of loss. She listened, she inquired, and she felt agony beyond the news. However, a photograph showing her grinning and sitting clumsily at a military installation instantly transformed her into Hanoi Jane, a national emblem of rage. Despite being innocent, the photo put her to the test, generated a lot of negative reactions, and destroyed her prospects of being renowned. Jane later claimed that she wasn't seeking the truth, but rather felt horrible about how the picture was interpreted. She was humble enough to acknowledge how hurtful it was for many. Rather than disappearing, she put in even more effort to use tales, love, and art to recover. Not for laughs, but because it was true, Jane produced and starred in the 1978 film Coming Home as a woman who tends to a wounded Vietnam veteran. In addition to earning her another Oscar, that film altered public perception of her as a morally upright person rather than a celebrity. Jane never lost her heart despite the difficulties. She was aware that people would misinterpret her work. Nothing can ever alter your reputation if you live your entire life speaking the truth. In that stillness and on the long journey back, she discovered enduring resilience that was independent of acceptance. In support of empathy and justice, she also discovered a voice that grew louder. Jane Fonda may be ready for some serenity after all the drama and suffering she endured in private. However, she would encounter her most difficult issues during the ups and downs of her personal life. Over the course of several years, she was married 3 times, each time displaying new depths of weakness, longing, and an unconscious craving for unconditional love. At the age of 27, Jane married French filmmaker Roger Vadim for the first time in 1965. She desired stability in a world that demanded perfection because she was young and erratic. The spark that made Jane famous was Vadim, who was nearly 10 years older and well known for having intense romances with Hollywood celebrities. She overcame her fear of asexuality by learning to embrace it. She became a global symbol of beauty thanks to Barbarella. However, the darkness grew worse behind that light. Jane was thrilled to become a mother when their daughter Vanessa was born in 1968, but she soon found herself caught between her own self and how other people perceived her. She felt as though she had failed at both despite her best efforts to be both. Vadim positioned her in areas that flaunted her physique. Jane desired individuals with depth, those having objectives, emotions, and suffering. Their conflict intensified. Her motherly guilt tore at her heart as their beliefs, objectives, and sense of self collided. Jane later acknowledged that she frequently felt like a picture in Vanessa's life, constantly there yet infrequently present. At the height of her beauty and renown, she felt hollow, disengaged, and uncertain about whether she was living or only pretending. Their marriage disintegrated as their objectives shifted. Vadim desired to attend a performance. Jane sought purpose. She left her marriage and a life that was too difficult for her in 1973, and no one noticed her. She chose reality over illusion in Vanessa's case. But there were consequences to that decision. Even after becoming a mother, she continued to have reservations. It enlarged them. She felt free but inadequate, bold but broken. Jane Fonda was still a woman seeking unconditional love despite all the accolades and attention she received. It wasn't just their marriage that ended when they left Vadim. That was the beginning of a journey that would last the rest of her life. Jane Fonda began a fresh chapter as soon as she left the picture Roger Vadim had created for her. This time, she teamed up with Tom Hayden, a man whose battles took place on protest lines rather than movie sets. He had a fiery political name that meant more than love to Jane. It put things right. Jane had experienced tragedy, celebrity, and quiet battles by the time she was 35. In addition to a companion, she discovered in Tom a cause, a conviction, and a philosophy that she could cling to in the dark. However, she was unprepared for the internal conflict between the private mother and the public rebel. When their son Troy was born in 1973, Jane believed that motherhood would be the end of the world. Rather, it caused her to split up. Tom desired a companion who could assist him with his endeavors and transform his home into a comfortable living space. Jane tried her hardest. Nothing felt complete, even though she rocked her baby to sleep, marched, and raised money. I didn't know how to be a mother. Love was subjected to conditions. Parenting itself became a prison of perfection. She hurried home from speeches to catch up on news she missed and skipped sleep to attend strategy sessions. The guilt persisted. It was difficult for her to be tender at bedtime and forceful at parades. Behind their collective action, the fissures widened. Jane started to believe that Tom viewed her more as a sign, a powerful and lovely sign, than as an equal. Their efforts for charities and genuine transformation were insufficient to bridge the emotional divide in their marriage. The emptiness she had experienced as a youngster returned, but this time it was cloaked in marital responsibilities. We missed mornings, we didn't hear Troy's sobbing, and we processed our guilt by ourselves. Her child frequently grew up without her, despite the fact that her action offered voice to many who lacked it. By the time of her divorce in 1990, Jane had established herself as a cultural force, but it had cost her personally. That despite her love for her children, she never felt sufficient for them. Jane missed the personal space she never learned to manage, but she didn't feel guilty about what she did. It was a matter of striking a balance between personal loss and public authority, not love, that ended Tom Hayden and her marriage. The toughest thing she had to do was to learn to forgive herself. Jane Fonda entered her third marriage with fatigue masquerading as hope rather than with aspirations and dreams. Despite their excitement, her first two marriages failed due to unfulfilled demands. In 1991, at the age of 53, she wed Ted Turner, a media tycoon with a vision, a kingdom, and an unpredictable warmth. Because they possessed enormous farms and held galas, the world believed they were unbeatable. They were featured on magazine covers because they were so adored. However, the woman behind those photos was gradually disappearing. Not only did Ted never tell her to change, but he also failed to notice that she was still burning. He admired her grace, attractiveness, and presence, but not the difficulties she still faced or the storms she had experienced. At one point, Jane appeared on film once more, but this time it was at her own house. She grinned and laughed at everyone when the moment arrived. She was a symbol standing beside him. But she sat there in silence, grieving, after the cameras stopped rolling. Jane was forced to confront a silent reality as the children grew older and the sounds of the house changed. She had forgotten who she was in a seemingly ideal life. There was only a gradual loss of identity, there was neither cruelty nor treachery. And she saw it clearly in that steady disintegration. If kindness isn't grounded in truth, it may become a golden prison. She departed in 2001, sorrowful for the woman she had left behind to maintain harmony, but not furious or fleeing. When the home grew frigid, Jane Fonda made the decision, possibly for the first time, to not be someone's crown, mirror, or inspiration. She chose to be her own. The most courageous and subdued section of her life's narrative, a love tale without a spouse but with love, was written at that point. As a mother in the peaceful, sacred, and occasionally shattered realm of motherhood, Jane Fonda's most significant role, the one that revealed her deepest wants and fears, was not on screen despite her 3 marriages and numerous new identities. Everyone was aware of her identity. To her children, she felt like a ghost. Time seemed to freeze and the room vanished when she held Vanessa for the first time. However, the camera consumed more of her life over the ensuing years than she ever intended. Despite being instructed to be cool and perfect by her mother, she continued to work too late, leave too frequently, and love too silently. Being with Troy made her feel both sad and amazed. He was present while she wasn't and remained in one spot while she was everywhere. She missed too many birthdays and bedtimes. On one occasion, she was preoccupied with a political fundraiser and neglected to call on his special day. She spent hours staring at the phone that night while alone in a hotel room, appalled that she was unable to answer it. "I had to learn to apologize with all my heart," she later added, "and not simply for faults." She also stated that she believed the choices she made were the best ones. She wasn't a decent mom. She was a mother whose remorse and weak hope permeated every space she entered. They improved gradually, though, via communication, private tears, and the development of undeserved but given trust. The purpose of her Georgia At-Risk Teen Fund was not to give back to the community. She expressed regret and pledged to assist other lost children in finding the stability, grace, and a dependable companion that she was never able to obtain. She received what no prize could give her because of their strength, the silent approval to fail and still be loved. Although Jane Fonda will be the subject of films and discussions, her children will remember her most for what she taught them. Not the ideal of a flawless mother, but the reality of a woman who never gave up on her dream of being one. It wasn't in front of a large crowd or on a movie set that Jane Fonda faced her most difficult battle. It took place following her rise to fame, 2 unsuccessful marriages, and her development as a strong mother. She was engaged in a silent struggle. Breast cancer struck like a nasty bill when she was 72. In 2019, she developed skin cancer before she recovered completely. Additionally, she was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's cancer at the age of 84. Once a representation of strength and beauty, the body had become a never-ending battlefield. Beyond the dimmed lights were sterile hospital rooms where the humming of IVs sounded like cheers. She bravely endured chemotherapy and told everyone about it, as if to say, "If I can do it, so can you." On certain nights, the once-loved woman felt isolated for no apparent reason. She once said, "I'm not afraid of dying, I'm afraid of leaving with regrets." And the regrets persisted. Missed anniversaries, broken hugs, and unanswered phone calls because duty and ideals always took precedence over love. She no longer had time on her side. Every step became a struggle, her back ached, and she lost her memory. Accepting frailty was difficult for someone who believed that beauty was about strength and grace. Her wealth, notoriety, and power were appreciated by people worldwide. At night, though, none of those things could keep her hand. There was only a feeble breath and a strong will, no cameras or spotlights. After completing treatment, Jane Fonda left a lasting message. She was happier, quieter, and thinner than before. According to her, having the strength to get back up after every setback is what defines true beauty, not being young or flawless. The way she chose to live her life, with all of her heart, courage, and profound human dignity, even as time eventually fell apart, was more significant than the honors or political victories she received. At the age of 87, Jane Fonda has moved out of the limelight of her celebrity. Rather, she leads a peaceful life with a distinct goal. Her Los Angeles house has evolved into a space where she can read, reflect, and take in the scenery. She evaluates her legacy based on the lives she has impacted, the connections she has restored, and the time she has spent with her kids once more rather than accolades or press coverage. Vanessa acknowledged that she had previously been absent, but that today she and Troy eat together, laugh together, and are honest with one another due of their humility and kindness. She is no longer defined by love. She has viewed solitude as a means of achieving freedom since 2017. Perhaps the most significant, however, was Jane's reconciliation with her father. On the set of On Golden Pond, 1981, Henry Fonda sobbed when he learned that Jane had forgiven him. "We'll never forget this moment." Cameras were unable to capture the moment when a lady was cured and her daughter was finally seen, but that silent apology, delivered too late, sealed the deal. Running profitable enterprises and making purposeful investments allowed Jane to become financially independent, which she then used to promote issues close to her heart, like climate justice and youth empowerment. Despite having fought cancer several times, she maintained her discipline and daily physical and mental health into her 80s. This demonstrates that her strength respects aging rather than resists it. Her eyes are steady and her hair is silver, and she speaks calmly and clearly about death. She just worries about having regrets when she leaves this life. Fame and wealth are not Jane Fonda's greatest gifts. It is evident in your fortitude, composure, and perseverance. What struck a chord with you the most after reading about Jane Fonda's life? Please share your thoughts below. Pick a number between 1 and 10 to represent her influence. Please like and subscribe if you would like to read more about Hollywood's most tenacious celebrities.